G'day guys, Nathan from Fabulous. Today we're going to be giving you a rundown on how to install our 4-inch short entry kit connected to the stock airbox on the new next gen Ranger. So just going to give you a quick rundown on some of the important tools that you'll need to carry out the install. Masking tape, tape up the guard so you don't scratch it. Tape measure and a Sharpie to mark out the template. Drill is important. Air hacksaw, this is a big one. There are a few other ways to cut the guard. I've seen guys use tin snips, nibblers. We find this to be the best, most effective way. Small blade, 32 TPI is important. The more teeth on the blade, the finer the cut, and if you get a blade that has 18 TPI on it, it will grab the metal and really jump around and you can risk damaging the outside of the guard. So 32 TPI is important. We use a die grinder with a spiral band. They have a few different names as well, but basically just a little sandpaper wheel just to clean the hole up. You can use a file if you don't have one of these. Air blower to blow all the shit off the car. Nutsert gun, this is a worth ratcheting nutsert gun, but a set of nutsert pliers will do the same job. Alternatively, if you don't want to buy a nutsert gun, you can use tech screws. We don't because it's not very good, but you can do it. Some sort of rust-proof paint to paint the guard once you've cut the hole, just for rust prevention for the future. And most importantly, the Chobani cup for the intake. So we're going to start off by taping up the guard. Up to you how much tape you want to put on the guard, depending on how much you want to risk scratching it. We tend to tape the whole guard just to make sure there's no risk of us damaging the car. Because it's a short entry snorkel, you technically only have to tape about this much. Really important to make sure you put tape right up in the top corner of the guard here, as that's where we'll pull a lot of our measurements from, so that way you don't risk damaging the paint with the end of the tape measure. Also tape up the inside of the A-pillar, that's where the bracket mounts. The reason why we mount on the inside of the A-pillar and not the outside is because that way when the door is shut, no one can access the fittings for the snorkel, so your snorkel can't be stolen while it's sitting out the front of your house. All right, so now that you've got the guard taped up, you can start by pulling the flare and the inner guard out. So we're just going to bang out all the screws in the flare so we can remove that. Always start with the bottom at the front first. So now that we've got the aftermarket flare off, you can see where the factory flare would usually sit. The factory flare has these white plastic clips in it which poke through the guard like that. They are an absolute nightmare to remove, and there is no physical way to take them out without breaking them. So because of that, when we supply you your kit, we supply you with a brand new set of clips. So that way, if you are to break any of these white clips getting them out, you don't have to be concerned because you can just put a brand new clip in the flare and then refit like so. So these screw clips on the Rangers can be a bit of a pain to pull out. Sometimes they just spin and don't actually back out. The easiest way to remove them, if that is the case, is get a pick tool, poke it in the back of the head of the clip and just lever it out ever so slightly. Grab a really fine pair of side cutters, put that behind it, and then that way you can get the clip out. So now that you've pulled all of the clips out, the inner guard will pop out. And you can just put that somewhere safe for later. So now that you've got the inner guard out, it's time to move into the engine bay with the air box and the washer bottle getting removed next. So now that you've got all the bolts out of the airbox, you can pull it out. You will need to modify it, so don't take it too far away. You do need to block off your intake point because you've got to cut a hole in the guard. You definitely don't want to risk any bits of metal ending up down there and in your turbo. So just make sure that's nice and tight. If you don't have access to a Chobani cup, which you should, a rag and some tape will be more than fine. So to remove the washer bottle, you have to start by pulling the neck off first, just two 10mm bolts. Annoyingly, they're Loctited in, so they are hard work to get out. If you are thinking about taking on this install yourself, I would highly recommend not filling your windscreen washer bottle up 2 days before doing it, because once you pull this neck out, water goes everywhere. So the emptier your washer bottle is, the better you'll be. So in the bottom of the washer bottle, you have a nut holding that down on there, which has to be taken out. You have to undo the washer tube. It's just that little black clip. It pops down and then you slide it off. I always leave that until I'm ready to pull the washer bottle out though, because the second you pull that off, it will start, water will start coming out. So you will need to undo this plug to get the washer bottle out as well. I leave the wiring loom attached to the washer bottle through here just because it's way easier, and then that way you can pull it all out on the bench as one piece. So you might be wondering why you have to take the washer bottle out. Basically, there is just no room under the inner guard to run 4-inch piping. So because of where the washer bottle sits, the size of the snorkel, aesthetics, like the whole lot of it, Ford have unfortunately manufactured their washer bottle so it runs the entire length of the guard and is quite close to the outside of the guard up underneath. So the best way to make a snorkel is just to remove it and replace it with one of our fabricated components. Now, this wouldn't matter if it was short entry, mid entry, long entry, it really makes no difference. In all possible scenarios, we had to get rid of the washer bottle. So now that you've got an absolutely saturated pulling your factory washer bottle out, you can remove the pump and the low level sensor, which retrofit into our washer bottle so that everything works as factory. So before you mount the low level sensor and the pump into the washer bottle that we've supplied you, you will have to fit it into the car and mark out the hole for the new bottom mount location. So just put it down in there like that. It goes in between the lip and the rubber. Put your bolt in the top. Get it started, a couple threads and nip it up. Right. So as far as the location goes, you want to push the washer bottle forward so that it's not hard against the rubber, and mark it with your other hand. Now you can remove it, drill a nutset at the hole. I always use a slightly larger drill bit to deburr the hole, just that way the nutset has a nice purchase on the mount. So before you pull the pump and the sensor out, it's probably not bad practice to unplug them and put the wiring loom to the side, just that way you don't risk damaging it. Right, once the loom's out of the road, You can use a little lever bar and gently lever the low level sensor out. And same again with the pump. So you just got to be careful when you're pulling the pump out that you don't damage this nipple. You also need to remove the little grommet to retrofit it into the washer bottle that we supply. Right, so now that you've got everything removed and sitting on the bench, we spray a bit of canola oil around these. Just lubes them up, makes them a bit easier to go in. Don't need much, just put a little bit on one and sort of spread it around on the outside and on the inside. Just make sure that they are seated nicely before you go trying to put the pump and sensor in. So once you've got the grommets in, you can gently put the pump and the sensor in. You will need to work it around a little bit to get it in the grommet without pushing it through the inside of the washer bottle itself. I'll just use a bit of a twisting motion and make sure it's nice and firmly seated. The low level sensor is a bit harder to get in. If you've got a clamp handy, I would recommend using it. So you don't have to do this with a clamp. We do just find it makes it a bit easier to install and less chance of damaging things. Right, it's the same again, nice and firmly seated. And then you can plug in your wiring loom before you put it in the car. Ta-da! So now that we have the pump and the sensor installed, I'll give you a quick run through on our washer bottle. So the top and the bottom plate are laser cut items. The tube that we use is Radius Edge RHS. And it's 100mm square instead of 75, which some people tend to use as well. This gives us a bigger capacity than some other washer bottles on the market. The reason we use the Radius Edge tube is so that way you don't risk any wiring or vacuum lines or washer bottle lines rubbing on it and possibly splitting in the future. Everything's TIG welded in-house and powder coated in-house as well. Our powder coating procedure covers a chemical stripper and primer, so that way the unit itself is prepped as well as possible, and then we put on a Dulux Manix Black powder coat which has a 10-year warranty. The reason we use Manix Black is to match the trimmings in the rest of the engine bay. As you'll notice, it's a slightly textured black, which is also anti-marring, which means that you have much less chance of scratching it if you're in the engine bay doing other things, fitting other accessories, or if you're just in there going ham with the gurney after you've been up the beach, you don't have to worry about marking the washer bottle. The other thing that you'll notice is that the lid on the washer bottle has a small hole in it. We drill a 1mm hole in the lid because what we found originally, without the hole, the pump can't actually suck pressure through because it becomes a fully sealed system. So having the hole in the lid is absolutely necessary. So now that we've given you a rundown on what the washer bottle is and how it works, let's put it in the car. So when you put the washer bottle in the car, we put the bottom bolt in first, using the bolts that we supply you, so that way you don't have to fish around in your shed looking for some. Once you've got the bottom bolt started, position it so you can start the top, and you can tighten the top bolt. It's not critical, but aesthetically it looks nice if you square the washer bottle up with the cowl panel before you tighten it up. So obviously now that we've moved the washer bottle, the factory piping is no longer going to reach. We supply you with a barbed joiner, extra washer hose and 2 different size zip ties. So that way you can extend the washer tube over and plug it back into the pump. So remove the line off of the T-piece, like so. So when you're installing the joiner piece, you can hold the middle with a pair of pliers, don't squeeze it too hard, or you can squash it. And you want to make sure that you have the tube the whole way down onto all the barbs, so that way it won't pop off. So now that you've got the joiner piece connected, you can zip tie the new line up. Zip tie it underneath the factory wiring loom with the zip tie heads pointing down. That way it won't interfere with the snorkel kit while you're trying to fit it. And make sure when you cut your zip tie tails off, you leave as sharp of an edge as possible for the next person to work on your car to cut their fingers. So you'll notice that both of these hoses are way longer than they need to be. We leave it up to you to cut them down. So pull the T-piece off of the factory hose and fit it onto the pump. And then you can get a length to shorten your factory hose. Chuck that on the floor like a sparky, and then refit to the T-piece. So now that you've got that all the way home on the T-piece, refit it to the pump, and then you can cut the new piece to length. Reckon about there. Alright, so now they're both all the way home, you can refit that to the pump for the final time and grab another zip tie, and you can just zip tie that up nicely like that and then plug the wiring back in. Alright, so now we're going to modify the airbox. Start by removing the lid and the filter. Put the filter somewhere well away from where you're going to be working because you don't want it getting covered in any plastic. To remove the inlet out the front of the airbox, you just have to put a bit of downward pressure on it with a flathead screwdriver and your elbow, and it'll pop straight out. So you've got a hole saw or a hole in the side of the airbox now for the new inlet to go into. Conveniently, Ford have put a center point right in the middle of the airbox for you. So, chuck your arbor in the drill. Alright, so now that you've hole sawed the side of it out, just clean it up with a file. Just so that way any burrs or sharp edges are completely removed. So next we'll put the blanking cap in that we supply you. You'll notice it has a little notch out in it, that's for the bottom. It's good practice to drill it first before silicon it. That way you get less chance of plastic swarf, an aluminium swarf in your silicon and in your airbox. I'm going to put this through my finger. So now that you've drilled your holes, just bang a bit of silicone around to seal it up. We use Sally's Roof and Gutter. Once you've got it riveted in, you can just run around and tidy up all the excess silicone, and then we'll move on to putting the spigot in. So we're going to drill the base of the airbox first. What we do is we go dead center in the bottom first, and then about 50 mil either side of that hole. Basically, you just want to spread the holes and the rivets as far around as you can, and still being able to get access in there with your rivet gun. It's important when you're putting the spigot in that it runs straight, because there is a member in the engine bay here, and if that rotates that way or that way, it'll obviously hit it, and it will make a difference to how it sits in the silicone as well. So the best way to do this is to just put a bit of tape around the edge. And that way you can eye it up that way first. Make sure you're nice and square. So as far as how far in you need to go, you want the edge of the tube to be in line with the edge of the base, like so. So with the airbox sitting flat on the bench, you can square it up that way. It's pretty noticeable if you're in the right position. So just make sure you're running dead flat and that it is just inside on the inside, and you can mark your first hole. You can use one of the rivets that we supply to position it. Again, put your fingers back on the inside to make sure that it is sitting flush. But don't drill through your fingers, please. Right, so once you've got your 3 holes drilled with your rivets sitting in there, remove the rivets, remove the tape, put some sealer around it, and then you can final fit. So put a nice healthy bead of silicone around. It's better to put more on than not enough, because otherwise you're just going to have to pull it out and do it again. And then again, just clean up your excess sealer. So once you've got your spigot in, your blanking plate in, and the airbox is clean, we can refit it to the car. Probably the only important point of refitting the airbox base is just to make sure that you've got clearance to the washer bottle pump while you're fitting. It's also important when you're refitting the lid to make sure that you have all of the clips in and located at the back of the airbox before trying to clip the front down. So now that you've got the airbox back in the car, you'll be able to jump under and see the clearance that we were speaking about with the spigot and the front member behind the headlight. One thing you can do while you're drilling the airbox base, if you just want to double check, you're welcome to put the airbox base back in the car, put the spigot in, double check all of your tolerances and mark it in the car if need be as well. So your template will have 2 sets of measurements on it, a rear point and a front point. To get these points, we always measure from the back left-hand corner of the guard and pull forward in 2 spots, and then from the top of the guard down. Tape measure choice is important because what we've noticed in the past is with bigger builders style tape measures, it sort of limits you for how close you can get in there and will change how you mark the guard out. So a smaller tongue on your tape measure as possible. On your template, you'll also have a bottom of bracket measurement. Mark that out now. So to mark out your bottom of bracket measurement, put the tape against the same point of the guard and measure up the pillar to the specified dimension. So once you've got your template lined up with the measurements, you can trace around it. Now, the reason why we use this style of measuring for our templates as opposed to the traditional safari style of just having a big piece of paper and lining it up with all the edges is that we find that this is far more accurate. The big piece of paper works fine for a safari snorkel because the holes that you're drilling are behind the snorkel, so you do have room for error. And when you're trying to line a piece of paper up this big, you will have a lot of movement. So to get the best hole possible the first time around, we've come up with this, and we've been using this for 6 years and we've never had any dramas yet. So when you cut the hole out, it's important to cut on the inside of the Sharpie line you've just drawn. This will ensure that you get the best fitment possible. I also drill quite a big hole at the back here before cutting. I find that cutting the back edge of the radius can be a little bit tricky, so if you just drill a big hole there, it makes it much easier. Cue worst noise in the world. Alright, so now that you've got your hole cut, just clean it up with your spiral band just to remove any sharp edges. Once you've got your hole cut and deburred, you can apply the pinch weld. Now the pinch weld is directional, so you'll see here that the edge is sitting up. If that happens, flip it around and put it on the other way because the edge is supposed to bite into the outside of the guard. When you cut the pinch weld, I always cut 5mm past where you've started, so that way when you put it down, it creates a really nice joint and there's no gap. Put the end in first and then push it down. All right, so now you've got your pinch weld on, it's time to chuck the snorkel in the hole and mark the brackets for the pillar. I usually get a bit of cooking oil and just spray a bit of cooking oil on the pinch weld, just so that way snorkel goes in the hole nice and easy. Line the bracket up with your measurement that you took before. Just check how the snorkel's sitting. Because our templates are so good, it's going to be perfect. And then you can mark your holes for drilling the pillar. Now, it is important when you drill the pillar that you drill closer to the outside than what you do the inside. And the reason for that is because of how we manufacture our snorkels. If you drill the holes too close to the inside of the car, you can risk the bracket touching on the door frame. So to avoid that, just drill closer to the outside. So as a general rule of thumb, we come about 8 to 9mm down the pillar from the outside with the tongue of the tape touching the outside of the car. This way you are far enough in so that you can drill a nice hole, put the nutsert in there and it doesn't damage the outside of the car, but it's also far enough out that you're not going to risk the bracket hitting the door frame. So now that you've test fitted the snorkel and marked out the pillar, come back, remove your pinch weld and paint the guard. That way the paint can dry while you're drilling and nutserting the pillar. It's good practice as well to hold a piece of cardboard up in behind the hole while you're painting, so that way you don't cover everything in the engine bay in paint. Once you've drilled the holes, just deburr them with your bigger drill bit. So when you're drilling the pillar, you definitely can risk damaging the outside of the pillar here. Basically what happens is the drill bit bites, pulls through and puts an upwards dent in the pillar. So to avoid that, when you're drilling, make sure that you have 1 or 2 fingers against the car with the drill hard in against your chest, so that way you're as stable as possible. And I tend to almost pull the drill into myself and gently push up. It's important to let the drill do the work, not the pressure, because if you let the drill cut through nice and smoothly and slowly, you won't risk damaging the pillar. So all of our snorkel kits come with small flange nutserts, and the reason why we do this is to make sure that the snorkel has as much surface area as possible on the pillar when it's mounted. And the reason why we slightly countersink the holes is to make sure that the nutsert sits flat against the pillar. So that way when you bolt the snorkel up, the bracket is hard against the car, and it's not relying on the 2 nutserts to hold it in place. It's also got the whole surface area of the bracket to hold it as well. It's time to move on to doing all the pieces inside the guard to connect the snorkel to the airbox. This is the interconnecting pipe, powder coated Manix Black like everything else. Now, the orientation of all of these silicons and the hose clamps is important. These hose clamps, if they are around here, will hit the outside of the guard and put an outwards dent in it. You definitely don't want that. So to get them set up correctly, I go dead center of the bend and line the back of the hose clamp up with that, so that way you can access them from in the engine bay. You also want to make sure that the center of the bend lines up with the center of this bend, so that way this is a 90-degree angle. So when it goes onto the airbox, it points like that. Once you've fitted the interconnecting pipe to the airbox, if you hold it up, you can check what sort of clearance you have here. So basically, with how far the snorkel comes in the car, you want the start of the silicon joiner to be about 30 millimeters back from the edge of the hole. So that way when the snorkel goes in, you've still got room to tighten up the hose clamp. So if it's too long or too short, just loosen the hose clamp here and slide the pipe in or out of the other silicon joiner. Alrighty. So now it's time to put the snorkel in the hole. Just double check your hose clamps are still lined up in the engine bay, because once the snorkel is in the hole, you won't be able to turn them. And just like with every other silicon joiner we've applied to the car, a bit of lube goes a long way for making your life as easy as possible. So this part can be quite tricky, and it's not a bad idea if you have someone available just to get a second person to give you a hand. Makes it easier to hold the top of the snorkel, and you won't risk damaging the pillar with the bracket while you're sliding it in and out. Cool. Start your bolts by hand before putting them in with the power tool, just that way you don't risk cross-threading the threads, because if that happens, they are never coming back out. So now you got the snorkel in the hole, bolts in the bracket, it's all done up. Cruise around and tighten up all your hose clamps. So obviously this one you do from in the bay, the one on the airbox do from up underneath. Before you put the inner guard in, it probably wouldn't hurt to check that your windscreen washers are working. Sometimes with the pump in the washer bottle, it does need priming to be able to suck water through. So it doesn't hurt to check before you put the inner guard in, so that way you don't have to pull it all back out. So if it does need to be primed, all you have to do is just remove the T-piece off the bottom of the pump, let some water run through. It's almost like it gets an airlock that you need to release. So if you start the car, you don't have any water coming out your washers, just pull the T-piece off, release the airlock and plug it back in. Before you fit the inner guard, if you have any gaps from the pinch weld to the snorkel when you've cut the hole out, you can push the pinch weld down to the snorkel, obviously within reason. So you'll see here we have a very, very slight gap. Basically what you can do is just push the pinch weld down. It does help if you can get hands on either side to make sure it seals very nice. But just push it down, push it up to the snorkel, and then that way there'll be no gap left. So now you've got your inner guard back on, and in this case your flare back on. Time to give the car a clean down. We use this stuff. It's available super cheap, I think, and online. It's pretty much just a spray polish wax. You can use any sort of car polish or wax. The only thing I would recommend before putting a microfiber on the car is just to give it a final blow down, especially in the door rubber from drilling the hole. Little bits of metal shavings can sit in there. Just give the car a really good blow down with compressed air, make sure there's no metal sitting anywhere. Grab yourself some polish and a brand new microfiber and give it a clean up. So that was a step-by-step guide on how to fit one of our 4-inch short entry to stock airbox next gen Ranger kits. Now this video is designed to be used in conjunction with our fitting instructions, and if at any point you need to reference back, always consult your fitting instructions. More importantly, if you're really not sure, before you do anything, give us a call. So if you like this kind of content, make sure you subscribe to our channel because there'll be plenty more of it to come, including a video that we have on our next gen Ranger airbox, which you can view here. On you, boss.